getting somebody, in a doubting frame of mind, or getting them to really look at what they've become involved in, is that usually a one-shot deal? Is that usually a one conversation, and you convince the person, and they just up and get out at that point?
No, it's not. Sorry.
Right.
Unless they really are close to it themselves. Unless you kind of intuit that they've had it, and they're looking exhausted, and they're looking unhappy, and they're kind of hoping to be rescued. I know that it's going to be very important to feel as a loved one that you're making an impact, you're making a difference, you're intervening when you need to, but you also don't want to rush it. You really want to be able to see this as a slow burn. Unless, of course, the person really is in danger. Then, you get to contact the police, you get to do what you need to do if the person's health and welfare is at immediate risk. And you will have the law behind you if that's something that really is something that you can prove, and you do need to jump in. But in most other cases, this is a situation where you want to be able to kind of entice the person to feel comfortable with you, feel safe with you, have continued communication. And the way to do that is by not coming on too strong, by not scaring the person away, and also by not acting like the kind of person that the cult has warned them about. And they have warned people against people who are going to be trying to take away their connection to the cult. It's usually translated as taking away their salvation, or taking away their rights, or taking away their freedoms. Cults will often say the opposite, right? That they're somehow upholding people's freedoms, and other people taking them out of the cult are going to try to take it away. So very often they've been made to feel scared of talking to you, and so you don't want to scare them further. You actually want to be able to prove the cult wrong. You want to be able to act in a way that they were not warned about. In fact, that's a very important thing to do. Because as soon as you do that, the person can very often, and I've heard this from former members, they can very often say, oh, actually this is not the way they said friends and family were going to be. I'm now wondering what else they told me that might not be fully accurate. And you hope that it becomes like a house of cards. They might not be able to open up to you about that, but at least in their mind, they'll see that maybe not everything they're told is accurate. That's very good. It's very good to be able to cause that moment of conflict. The other part that's important is always to remember that if you feel like you've done something where you've pushed a person, you can tell they're closing down, and you can tell they're backing away, or you can tell they're kind of fighting you because they feel like you're fighting them. That's when you end that conversation and you apologize and you say, oh, I think I hit a note there that was unpleasant for you. I pushed a button. I really am sorry. That's why I'm asking you to guide me and let me know how to talk to you about this. And then you change the subject, because there are other things to talk about. When people are involved in cults, they become sort of like a one-note samba. That's what they talk about. And it's actually really good to be able to let them know and remind them that there are plenty of other things to cover in the conversation. So always keep in mind, how do I make sure to leave this person feeling like we had a better than expected conversation, and in fact they enjoyed it, and they kind of miss talking to me, and they might want to do it again. You don't want to risk the relationship just because you're in a hurry. But I understand why you're feeling that you're in a hurry. Something else that I wanted to make sure to mention with this is that you're going to be able to see if the person standing in front of you is acting like themselves, or if they're acting like the cult told them to act, and if they're saying things the way they've been guided to say them. That, very often cults will train people to know how to handle these conversations, right? And so they'll give them the phrases to use, and they'll go through really role-playing. If someone says this to you, what do you say in response? And And so these are what are called in this field thought-stopping techniques. Because if you have an automatic response, then you don't have the feelings inside that would normally get triggered if you really had to think about how you felt, and if you had to think about if you're really happy, and if you had to think about if this is really serving all of your goals and needs. It's like if someone comes up to you on the street and says, Chris, how you doing? And you say, fine. You might not be fine at all, but if you say fine, you feel fine. Like, doesn't matter. It wasn't a real conversation. So you make sure that it's a real conversation. And the way you do that is you try to help them put things in their own words. You're going to hear cult lingo in this conversation, and you might not know why they're using the words they're using or what those words actually mean to that person, because sometimes it's English, but it's used in sort of a different way. So you can say, help me understand what you're saying. I really want to get it. What you're trying to tell me and the fact that you're spending time with me and you're wanting me to understand this, that really means a lot to me. But I want to go away from this conversation feeling like I really understood. But when you use that language, it's hard for me to understand. Can you put it into your own words? Then you take the person out of that cult persona, out of the thought-stopping techniques, and you have them become their real selves. And what can happen in that moment is it can go different directions. One is they can start to feel something which might feel uncomfortable, but at least you did something, I think, that really achieved the goal that you were hoping for, that they had to think, does this even make sense to me? Do I know what I'm saying? But also, if someone says, I can't put it into my own words, then it really means that they don't fully get it. They haven't integrated the message. They're just spitting back what they've been taught, which is also an important thing for them to understand and to know about themselves. Mm-hmm. So one more thing to add about that. When you want to get someone to really be themselves, you can sometimes remind them of things in their childhood. I was just remembering when we did such and such, or in preparation for that conversation, you bring a picture you found of a good time you had together. You remind them that life wasn't so bad before they got involved. And if they also were sort of in this group for a very long time and they might not have a memory of childhood, you let them know about something special happening in the world outside the cult, meaning something that would speak to them, something of great meaning that would speak to their heart, and you show them that that's not only possible for people involved in the cult. So you really come prepared, but again, you kind of share it like, oh, this just occurred to me, but you've done a lot of prep to get ready for that conversation, and also try to make them laugh. I have found, of the hundreds of different cults I've dealt with and the over 1,000 former members I've dealt with, that by and large, they become a pretty humorless group of people, because what they're doing is of utmost importance. And
saving the world, man, there's nothing more important than that.
Right. So there's no time to just be frivolous and laugh.
Right.
And
that's right.
You want to be taken seriously. You want to be acting seriously. You're also exhausted, so you're not really feeling funny. But if you can make the person laugh and smile, you actually do a couple of things that are real gifts. One is you help them get back into who they really are, that they are people who really can be enjoying this life, and they will notice in that moment, this feels unfamiliar. What is this? Oh, this is joy. This is something I haven't felt in a while. Wonder why that is. But also, you help them see that a conversation with you can actually be one that helps them feel good, helps them feel physiologically better, that they can come away with it feeling relaxed. Because when you laugh, you breathe deeply, and it releases kind of good feeling chemicals in your body that make you feel better. Right. And then as soon as people go back into their cult world, right, everything gets ramped up again. Heart starts racing, adrenaline is pumping, and you feel different.
I mean, this is 100% accurate for how I used to be and feel. The rare times that I could go visit my family and be with them and hang out with them, it took a day or two to decompress enough to actually be home and just be in the moment and not be freaking out about whether I was going to get called back or whether, some problem was on my plate that it was going around and around and around in my head. And literally it took a couple days just to chill on that. And then, so this was only a handful of times that I got away long enough to actually have that happen. And it's very important. It actually is voluminously important, I think, that one very effective way of dealing with somebody who's in a cult is to through your conversation and through your activities remind them or get them thinking about the things that they used to like, that they used to really be passionate about, that they used to have, that they used to take very seriously or used to very much enjoy, right, before their cult experience, when the cult becomes this domineering, overshadowing thing that takes over your whole life. There were things before that time that mattered to the person, right? Mattered to me. And if more time had been spent getting me thinking about those things and reminding me of those things and those good times and whatnot, it makes it's part of planting the seeds. You don't have to be directly getting a person to doubt the cult leader's teachings in order to be planting seeds about what, about them thinking or reevaluating why they're doing what they're doing.
Right. Right. And you brought up a good point. I think sometimes it is in those kinds of subtle moments that, again, you don't have to hit someone over the head, best not to, that can make a big impact. I learned this actually really inadvertently from a family I was working with many years ago, where when they finally had an opportunity to meet with their daughter, who had been taken in by a Bible-based group, and was proselytizing on the streets at all hours of the night and really putting herself in harm's way, but believing that she was under the protection of the leader and God, and it was scaring the family to death. The mom was wearing a perfume that the daughter remembered, and she hadn't smelled in a long time. And when I talked to the daughter who finally left, she said it was in those moments that she had this kind of multi-sensory connection to her family. So now I actually use that, and I encourage families to, wear the cologne or perfume that the child was raised smelling, bake cookies that really remind them of the cookies they loved for a certain holiday, a holiday they haven't been able to spend with their family for a period of time. It's in the subtleties that can really make a big difference. Also, if you're noticing that they're saying something that really doesn't seem to be in line with anything logical, you don't want to call them on it in that way, but you want to help them think. Because there's not a lot of thinking, actual thinking, that takes place in cults. There's a lot of memorizing.
And there's a lot of rationalization to justify why they're altering their thought processes to agree with the cult leader's teachings, which is not, would not classify that in the same way as creative or original thinking.
Right.
The rationalization, of course, more, and this is one of the things where, the more intelligent a person is, the more susceptible they can be to this, right? Where they're spending their brain power rationalizing beliefs that really just don't make any damn sense.
Right.
Right? And of course, I'm familiar with this with Scientology, and but you get in this with all kinds of groups, right? That I've been running across and seeing.
Right.
That's where their thinking power is going, and so they're trying themselves to justify all of this to themselves, and they've come up with some answer that lets them now communicate these ideas to somebody else, and it's all this sort of carefully constructed thought fortress that sort of sits there.
That's a good term, a thought fortress.
Yeah,
I like that
that's
yes.
I just came up with that.
That's good.
and
Trademark.
Yeah, that's right now, TM. And that's sort of where they're at, right? And so you're going to try to batter down the walls of that thought fortress to carry that analogy along. Probably not a good idea. In fact, I kind of like this analogy, because if you can be invited in to the fortress, right, you probably have a better chance from inside of, undoing or breaking it down than you do battering on walls.
Oh, yeah. Because as soon as you are in opposition, as soon as you're battering on these walls, what is the typical response? It's to reinforce the fortress.
Exactly. Buttress the walls.
Right.
That's right.
This is good. Okay. But the other part that is really interesting, not but, and, the other part, oh, by the way, say and instead of but. It's actually important. It's, again, in those subtleties. When they say something about what they're doing or what they're believing, don't say but, say, and I'm also wondering, so it stays positive.
It continues the thought forward rather than creates opposition.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's not an argument. It's still a discussion. No one has to be right. No one has to be wrong. And you don't want to come across as being more right. You really want to come across as being someone who's a student. You want to learn from them. But when you're noticing that they are saying something that is in contradiction to something else they said, even in a past conversation or even earlier in the conversation, and that's going to happen because cults and cult teachings are not necessarily logically based, even though they will talk about being logically based. So there are always going to be contradictions where you could point those out. And cult leaders are very clever about making sure that they can write things that are contradictory and get away with it. Because if you have a problem with it, it's your problem. And if you're bringing it to someone's attention, you're being negative, or that's your whatever it is, theta, whatever.
It's exactly. In Scientology, it's your reactive mind.
Yeah.
It's your overts. It's your being critical. There's these, again, thought-stopping sort of ideas that are put there that just shut down thinking. So when you're talking to somebody in a situation like this,
right.
It's not a good idea to necessarily attack those, because then they're just going to use those same thought-stopping labels on you.
Yes, right. So if, for example, you say to this person, okay, so I just heard you say that it's fine for you within this group that you're involved with to spend time with your family, and it's never been outrightly kind of, reinforced that you can't see your family anymore. And at the same time, you haven't been able to come home for any birthday, any anniversary, any funeral, any holiday. So help me understand that. So they might not know how to help you understand that because they don't understand it themselves, and they're not supposed to question it. But you're helping them see that it doesn't come together. This is an equation that doesn't actually go. And you want to sort of leave that on sort of in their laps. Okay, just think about that.
Right.
Just notice the dichotomy, notice the contradiction. And you don't say contradiction, and you don't say dichotomy, and you don't say this doesn't make sense, and you don't criticize it. You just put it out there, kind of in the ether, for them to notice.
I'll just because it's coming to mind right now, I'm going to give an example of this from my own experience that was a very important moment in time for me when I was involved in Scientology, which is a conversation that I had with my mom. Now, my mom had been a Scientologist, and she was, sort of now not so part of the flock anymore. This was even before I was in the Sea Organization, when I was still a staff member in Santa Barbara. And I was having a real hard time with the idea of continuing to be connected to my mom. There wasn't even pressure from the church to get me to stop being in communication with my mother. I was creating my own pressure about it because of her lack of involvement, and it was creating friction. And then one day, I had this conversation with her on the phone. This wasn't even in person, because I wasn't making time to go see her. And I was being sort of abrupt and difficult to talk to with her, and I was really having my issues in continuing to talk to her. But we loved each other. I mean, this was my mother. This was somebody that I was very close to. Still am. She salvaged that relationship between us by pointing out one day on the phone, "Look, Chris, Scientology is all about improving conditions in life, right? And you're supposed to be in better communication with the various aspects and parts of your life as a result of using Scientology. That's true, right?" And of course it's inarguable. Of course that's in the materials of Scientology, that it's supposed to improve your life and it's supposed to improve your communication. Communication is very important in Scientology. So they say, right? And when she pointed that out, I had to say, well, yes, that's true. And she said, well, look, I'm your mother, you're my son. For the rest of your life and for the rest of mine, we're going to have that relationship. Whether we're in touch or not, I'm always going to be your only mother and you're always going to be my son. And that transcends anything that you're doing and anything that I'm doing. Mm-hmm. Whether I'm doing Scientology or not, whether you're doing Scientology or not. If Scientology's goal and purpose is to improve our relationship and our communication, then wouldn't it make sense that we would stay in communication, in good communication,
wow. Nice.
Regardless of what I am or am not doing in Scientology, right? And that was inarguable. It was mm-hmm. beautiful logic, and it was such a well-crafted little argument. And I don't know that my mom, spent a lot of time putting that argument together. It just sort of was in the course of our conversation. But it literally was a turning point for me that ended up being a very important thing years later in my mother being, the person that I was never going to stop talking to, because she had put that argument there in such a way that Scientology couldn't break that argument. Mm-mm. Because it was made using Scientology, right? It was Scientology principles that made that argument, that made me realize that I needed to continue having a relationship with my own mother, which I had been considering breaking off because of, and only because she wasn't doing Scientology, right? That was my own internal pressure, and of course, other Scientologists telling me things that made me think that.
Right.
And, so then for the rest of the years, I joined the Sea organization and moved on up, and very rarely went home to see her or see them. Yet always, called, infrequently, always had a communication line with her. And never considered, years later, when I was in the Sea organization, I was pressured to disconnect from her. And because that argument had been laid so well, I refused to disconnect from her. And in fact, I used the same argument to argue back to the people who were in Scientology. No, why would I do that? That's my mother. She's always going to be my mother. Why would I not want to be in touch with her,
Right.
So these kind of little things, she wasn't trying to get me out of Scientology. She wasn't trying to convince me to stop doing Scientology. But she successfully made it, part of my, Scientology experience that I would always be in touch with her.
Right. I mean, it's a very powerful thing also. It sounds like when you were saying what she said, you were also kind of mimicking how she said it, which was important.
Yeah, no, that's how the conversation went.
Yeah. So that kind of even tone. And
very much so. There was no yelling, screaming.
Right.
Yeah, no.
Wasn't accusatory.
Right. Very reasoned, very rational. She was upset when we were having that conversation because, I was sitting there telling her, I'm very upset about this. You're not doing Scientology. It's not okay with me. And this had been a point that I'd been harping on for quite some time, right, in conversation after conversation after conversation.
Yeah.
And it came to a head. And rather than react or be very angry with me or, try to, convince me to stop doing that, she convinced me to stop doing that by using the Scientology.
Right. So the others outside of a cult are really up against quite a foe. They're up against the pressure of the group, but they're also up against something else that people often don't know about, which is that cultic groups will try to really rewrite your history so that it wasn't good, your marriage is not a good one, which drives spouses crazy, and you really should be with someone else in this group who's more in line with, etc., fill in the blank. Your childhood was not good. Your parents were always trying to control you. They're the manipulators. They're the abusers. They're the whatever the cult is doing to you. It's your parents or your loved ones, your husband, your wife. your children, sometimes if it's the parents who got involved in the cult, everyone else is doing all the things and is accused of doing all the things that the cult does. So that's why you want to really remind them of who you really are to them and what their life was really like before this, and that the cult isn't right about defaming you and really taking away all the joy, all the good memories, all the good foundation that you had before. Something else that becomes a pitfall is when a cult member will say, well, you just don't understand. There's no way for you to understand, and the only way to understand is to get involved, or the only way to understand is to come to a seminar, or to come to a Bible study, or to come to a whatever it is that, or to come to the ashram.
You have to experience it for yourself, or you'll never understand it.
Yes, right. Okay, so plenty of families have then gone to that weekend retreat. I mean, it's always a risk because there have been families, loved ones, spouses who have gone just to check it out or to prove that they are willing to do this for their loved one, and then they sometimes get sucked into. So be careful before you do that, and get prepared for learning about that group and mind control techniques. Talk to me before you do that.
Seriously, there's a guy who commented on one of my videos. I went in there laughing and thinking it was going to be a total joke, and 10 years later, I finally got out.
Yeah, I hear these stories. It's really, really so tragic when you hear about that. So, yes, be prepared. And there is a way to get prepared. And also, you want to be able to be honest about yourself constitutionally and emotionally if you can resist that kind of manipulation. Mm-hmm. And so then if it's not you, then it needs to be someone else who takes on that role. But to know also that that's a trap, because not only can you get involved, but let's say you go, but you're still not convinced. But you only went once. So you need to go again. Or you need to sign up for the next class.
That's right.
Or, I've heard this, you weren't truly feeling it in your heart when you were there, so you weren't as open to it. You were more reactive, et cetera, et cetera.
That's right.
Yeah, so there's sort of no way to have that work. If it's a show of allegiance and devotion to that person, and yes, I'm willing to do this if you want me to do it, then if you feel like it would benefit the relationship, then you go ahead and you do it. But you also want to prepare them ahead of time for the following and say, okay, I'm willing to do that. Again, be prepared for yourself so that you have your armor on. And you know how to act if you're approached by any of the leadership who you now hate, and how to respond and how to play it cool. But you want to say ahead of time, okay, I'm going to do that, but I also want it to feel like I'm going to get credit for doing something that you know is a little uncomfortable for me, or maybe a lot uncomfortable for me, but I'm doing it because I love you. And I want it to really feel like it was enough. And if afterwards you let me know that it wasn't enough, then I'm going to feel really frustrated, and it's also going to leave you feeling like you have loved ones who really didn't care. Like somehow this didn't make an impact. This didn't matter. You want it to matter. So let them know, okay, I'm going to do this, but I don't want it to all be undercut afterwards, because that's robbing me of having been able to show you how much I love you, and it's robbing you of being able to see that your family, your loved ones, your spouse, whatever, really cared enough to do this for you. So it's like you jump ahead of time knowing what the pitfalls will be, and you have a conversation about the pitfalls first, and then go into doing the action.
Yeah. That's something I would recommend doing.
It's a risk. It's
definitely a risky thing, because like, in Scientology, for example, unless you're shelling out money, for your next service, they don't believe you. Mm-hmm. They don't believe that you are sincere. They don't believe that in fact, they start labeling you, and there's something wrong with you, and you're not with the program, and you've got, there's just a panoply of labels that come with you not paying money. Mm-hmm. So, it sort of becomes its own little trap walking in there. And, unless you start forking over the Benjamins, they're not going to be convinced. And, of course, the last thing you're going to want to do walking into a situation like that is fork over the Benjamins, because you might as well be burning it, for all the value that you're getting.
There's also this kind of very clever delay tactic that's used by cults where they will say to the members or the followers, the devotees, who are going to be meeting with their families, well, if your family or if your friends, your spouse, whomever really loves you, they'll read the following books, they'll do this research, they'll read L. Ron Hubbard's fill in the blank, whatever, and then, or if it's a Bible-based cult, they'll study and they'll learn about different Bible quotations and chapter and verse if they really want to learn what you're learning. And then parents, I often see this a lot, parents, spouses, friends, will start spending a lot of time, hundreds and hundreds of hours, studying the books, studying the Bible, just so they can have a conversation, just so they can make an impact. It's not necessary. You want to be able to learn a lot about the cult, but you want to learn about how it operates and how it does what it does cleverly, and the control mechanisms, the influence. That's where you want to spend your time. But you also want to learn enough about some of the teachings just so that you can quote a little bit, but you don't have to become an expert in it. Because really, if you sit down and then go all out and have an argument that's quoting chapter and verse, or, what L. Ron Hubbard said in this book versus that book, there's almost no way to win, because you are not also being grilled for hundreds of hours about how to respond to those conversations and how to handle when someone says this and says that. So there's no way to win.
Taking on the dogma is not necessarily the way to go about convincing somebody that what they bought into is wrong, because there will always be some other argument coming out of left field.
Right.
That you're not going to anticipate.
Exactly. And what was also taught by the leadership one week might change the next week.
Yeah, exactly.
So you think you got it down, and now suddenly the rules change, the teachings change, and now they're redoing this class and that thing and whatever.
That's
it's sort of like down the rabbit hole.
I think what's important about that is that you really if you're going to take the time to learn about what the person's involved in, or you're going to learn about, the teachings of the thing, learn it in such a way that you're able to talk intelligently about it at least, but not like you have to be an expert, because you really don't. But like, for example, if you're gonna bring it up or talk about it or start, if you want to have any respect from the person who's involved in the cult, then you better at least know how to say the words, because it will instantly shut you down if you come across with something that that they just obviously wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
In Scientology, that the spiritual beings are referred to as thetans. So if you start talking about thetans, you're shut down instantly. Nothing else you say is going to matter to that Scientologist, because you don't even know how to say the word thetan.
Right.
Right? It's that sort of, those kind of little mistakes can blow everything. Mm-hmm. So, so it's more like just learn some basics, learn a little bit, learn enough about it to, and again, like we were talking about before, learn from them. Have them tell you, because it's their understanding you're going to be dealing with anyway, not the minutia of what, is on Kabbalah Manual number 5, page 13.
Right. Right, exactly. Because I think also, I'm remembering a family I worked with where they were taking Bible study classes so they could have a conversation with their child. And I said, okay, you can do that if you want. But really, all you need to do is have a conversation, knowing also that if you're quoting back and forth, it's not a true conversation. What makes it a conversation is if you say to your loved one, tell me about something you learned from the Bible this week that you really liked or that meant something to you and why that is. Mm-hmm. That's a conversation. Mm-hmm. And you don't have to be an expert. And because what are you going to do? Are you going to say, well, actually, that's different from what John said. Well, again, then you're having an argument, and then you should be having a panel discussion at a conference. So you're not having a conversation. So you want to know why they brought that up and what they understand about it and what they like about it, what they don't like about it. That helps them really also see that you care. You care about what's going on in their mind and how they're feeling.